So, continuing in video 2 for chapter 4 on our First Amendment rights when it comes to businesses and work, and we talk about the right to your religious beliefs, the right to practice your religion, maintain your religious beliefs, how a religion is displayed. We look at things differently when we look at, again, privately held companies and government run agencies and properties. The government has a much greater duty to be more inclusive in the sense of religious displays. If there is a public property, be it Glendale Community College, be it City Hall, be it a park, be it whatever it may be that is city grounds, state grounds, county property, federal property, if they are going to display an item of religious meaning, be it a Christmas tree, a cross, whatever it may be, they cannot, under the First Amendment and the way it works, prohibit other religions from also displaying their religious items right next to, beside, near the religious items that the government agency put up. There is no religion that gets a preferential treatment over another religion, and as a result of that, all religions are welcome to place their items in a nearby area. Now, this comes into play in a couple of different areas. We'll talk about San Diego first. In San Diego, there was a large hill that was there, and someone had erected a huge cross on the top of this peak, a 40-foot cross, and it had been there for nearly 100 years. The federal government was transferred ownership of this property, and somewhere in the 1990s, a war memorial was built right next to the cross. Now, when this went from private land to federal land, there became a issue that people raised and said the cross was a part of the war memorial and would have given preference and an insinuation that all those being honored at the war memorial believed in the followings of the cross. And therefore the courts looked at this and said, you're right, and that cross cannot continue to be there, and they needed to move the cross from where it was so that the war memorial stood as a war memorial, not as a quote-unquote Christian war memorial. And that was an instance that happened. And there was another instance in a city hall in Florida where a Christmas tree was put up in a city hall. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with a holiday called Festivus. It was a holiday created by a TV show called Seinfeld. And with this Festivus, they have what's called a Festivus pole. Gentleman said he wanted to put his Festivus pole right next to the Christmas tree. When he was unable to do that, he sued the city. The courts agreed because the Christmas tree is a religious item. You cannot refute other religions from displaying their religious items. And it was very funny because what he used as evidence to prove Festivus was a real holiday, because it has to be a real holiday to get this protection, was the fact that Hallmark, the greeting card company, made a Happy Festivus card, which they said proves Festivus is a holiday. So that as far as religious items go. Now, if you have a religious belief, if you have some sort of clothing you need to wear or a time in which you need to pray, in which to honor your religion, businesses have the duty and the responsibility to give you that time, allow for that clothing to be worn, so long as it does not impede on their business. And what I mean by that is, as long as it is reasonable, you're allowed to do it. If it is unreasonable, if it causes a risk of harm to you or somebody else, then it can be refused. But so long as it's reasonable and allowable, it has to be allowed. So that is our First Amendment. These are things we look at to make sure that these are being followed in the workplace and businesses understand they apply to them. Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. Obviously, businesses have the right to put signs out that say no firearms are allowed, even though we all have rights to carry firearms. You can do that. Businesses and government agencies can restrict that and ask you to leave to find out if they find out you came in with a firearm against the will of the signs. Now, the Bill of Rights in all of the Constitution is tied to federal law, and federal law goes over all 50 states. What is very important in the amendments, there's specifically what's called the Fifth Amendment and 14th Amendment, which says, and specifically the 14th Amendment, that speaks that all the rights and protections given by the federal Constitution must be given to by the states as well. So a state cannot choose to limit a right that you have federally. And that is important to understand, that the 14th Amendment says, and specifically cannot deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So we look at that. And lastly, we're going to talk about something called the Supremacy Clause. And what the Supremacy Clause does is it clarifies what law you have to follow. And we'll use the idea of Glendale, Arizona for the purpose of this speech, this example. We've got, in Glendale, you are under the city laws. City of Glendale has ordinance and rules and regulations. There's also the fact that the city of Glendale is in Maricopa County. Maricopa County has laws, regulations. Maricopa County happens to be in the state of Arizona. Arizona has laws, regulations. Arizona is part of the United States of America. The United States of America has federal laws, regulations. So what the Supremacy Clause says is, when you've got those four different categories, city, county, state, federal government, if any of those laws, ordinances, regulations conflict with each other, if a city law does not mesh with a county law, it is a requirement, it is law. The Supremacy Clause says the county law is a law that prevails in the city, even though the city said, I want to do something different. And that goes all the way up to the U.S. government. Now, what is interesting about this, we'll talk about DUIs, driving, under the influence of alcohol. Let's say the federal government passed a law that said DUIs, if you have a blood alcohol level of 0.08 or higher, you are driving under the influence. That is the law of the land. That is what we say. State of Arizona cannot say, no, America, you don't get it. Here in Arizona, we like to drink and drive. We're going to make the blood alcohol limit 0.10. That is in conflict of the federal law, and that would be thrown out under the Supremacy Clause. Now, what Arizona could do, and what they're allowed to do, is say, we want to make the law more restrictive. And we're going to say anyone who has a blood alcohol level of 0.07 or higher is committing a DUI. That they are allowed to do. If it is maintaining or strengthening the federal law, whereas going to 0.10 is allowing people that would have been guilty under federal law to not be guilty under state law. This, by lowering it, makes it more restrictive, and that's allowable. And if that example is a little bit confusing, let me change it to minimum wage, which is much easier. Federal minimum wage is $7.25. No state can say our minimum wage is going to be $7. That wouldn't be allowed because the federal minimum wage is $7.25. But a state can say we're going to have a minimum wage of $12, $13, $15, whatever it may be, because it is at least as high as what the federal is. It is more so that more, and this was more giving, but it's a that's allowed. That's how Supremacy Clause works. So, okay, these two videos kind of highlight Chapter 4, and good luck and enjoy the reading, and we will talk to you soon.